Alice! Mike! What's going on? When I got home from work, an astonishing sight unfolded before me. My daughter Alice and my husband Mike were lying in the living room. I rushed over, but neither of them was breathing. Nearby, there was a rope and what seemed like a suicide note carelessly placed. With trembling hands, I picked up the note. Reading its contents, I was dumbfounded. What does this mean? Mike killed Alice. Then, unable to believe reality, I finished arranging the funeral for both of them. The police, too, had prematurely closed the investigation, assuming the note was accurate. In other words, it was ruled as a murder-suicide. That can't be right. Mike would never do such a thing. As I stood there in shock, someone came to visit me. And an unexpected truth was uncovered. I immediately reported this to the police, persistently asking them to reinvestigate. Reluctantly, the police agreed to reopen the case. Later, they came to my house. I'm sorry. It wasn't a murder-suicide. One of the officers said hesitantly. The two of them. I was filled with disbelief as the revealed facts unfolded. My name is Jessica. I turned 50 this year. I'm a working housewife with a part-time job at a local small company. My husband Mike is 52, 2 years my senior. He's a manager in the human resources department of a medium-sized company. We have one child, Alice, who is 11 years old. But Alice isn't our biological child. She's adopted. Mike and I got married in our 20s but couldn't have children. We went through infertility treatments for a long time. But the strain on my body was great, and we gave up before I turned 40. Instead, after discussing it, Mike and I decided to adopt. That's how we welcomed Alice into our family. Alice has grown up well, becoming a kind and honest child. Whether she's our biological child doesn't matter. We treasure Alice more than anything. Our family is no different from any other. No, there's an even stronger bond. I didn't want to believe such a horrifying event could happen to us. No, I still can't believe it. But it did happen in reality. Mom, I'm home. Alice returns home in the evening with her usual bright voice. Behind her, Alice's friends from the same class, who she's recently gotten close to, were there as well. Hi. We're coming in. Sorry to disturb. Welcome. It's Daniel and Nicole. Daniel is a mischievous boy who's good at games. Nicole is a model student who's very responsible. Somehow, they hit it off and lately, they've been playing together more often. They immediately go into Alice's room to enjoy some games. I hear their cheerful voices and can't help but smile. I prepare snacks for the three of them in the kitchen. It's a reasonably priced pound cake I bought from a nearby sweets shop. I briefly wondered if it was too cheap but then thought better of it. There's no need for pretense. The thing is, the elementary school Alice attends has a lot of wealthy families. Because many local reputable companies are located nearby, naturally, many of their executives send their children there. We just happened to build our house on a piece of land Mike's relatives sold us cheaply. We're not particularly wealthy. So, this was unexpected. At school events like class observations, many parents showed up dressed glamorously, carrying high-end brands. I felt a bit out of place in that atmosphere. I stood out in my no-brand clothes, and conversations at parent meetings revolved around overseas trips and fancy restaurants. I remember feeling somewhat uncomfortable. Consequently, their children also wear nice clothes and eat expensive things. Considering this, I hesitated to serve Alice's friends what might be considered cheap sweets. But there's no need to serve something expensive to children. It's not good to indulge Alice in luxury from such a young age. Regaining my composure, I knocked on Alice's room and entered. Today's snack is pound cake. Enjoy, everyone. The children's cheers rose. Lucky! Thank you. Thank you very much. Daniel's eyes sparkled, and Nicole thanked me sweetly. Alice smiled and said, "Thanks, Mom." Regardless of adult circumstances, children are innocent. That's what I thought, but then Daniel said something unexpected. "This is the $2.30 pound cake from that shop, isn't it?" You know your stuff well, Daniel. But even if it's cheap, it's really tasty. I felt inwardly panicked, being seen through by a child. That store's $6 cheesecake is the best. Higher price means better taste, right? Is your family struggling financially, Alice? Daniel asked bluntly, leaving Alice and me with puzzled expressions. I wonder if they talk about this kind of stuff at home. As I was trying to figure out how to respond, Nicole came to our rescue. "That's not nice, Daniel. It's rude to talk about prices like that." "It's fine. By the way, the cake made by a famous pastry chef we ordered at my house the other day was really delicious." Daniel started bragging, unfazed. I was surprised by this, but Alice and Nicole seemed interested, nodding along with wow expressions. Well, it must be the age to want to show off. The children started getting excited, so I left Alice's room. That night, Mike came home. We all gathered around the dinner table, and as usual, Alice was chattering away. "We played games today, too. I beat Nicole, but I couldn't beat Daniel. He's really good at games. Plus, he knows a lot about food and stuff." "Yes, he does." I nodded absent-mindedly. Thinking back on today's events, I felt uneasy, but it seemed Alice wasn't bothered, so that was a relief. But I didn't expect Daniel to suddenly start talking about prices. Daniel's family must be quite prestigious. I remembered seeing Daniel's mother at a school event, dressed in expensive clothes and looking down on me. They must be accustomed to only the finest things. Not giving a second thought to a cheap pound cake. Mike, unaware of these subtleties, just smiled. "It's great that you have such good friends." "Yeah, I've been having so much fun ever since I got into this class." It was an ordinary peaceful moment. I was naive. I had no idea that such ordinary days would suddenly come to an end. The sense of unease came quickly. Lately, Alice seemed a bit out of sorts. Something must have happened at school. Maybe a fight with a friend, or trouble with her studies. She's been eating less at dinner lately and spending more time holed up in her room. Today, she went straight to her room as soon as she got home. She used to come into the kitchen saying I'm hungry and talk brightly about her day at school. Worried, I bought Alice's favorite muffins on my way home from work. I thought we could eat them together and I could listen to what was bothering her. "Alice, it's snack time." Imagining Alice's happy face, I opened the door without knocking. "Wait, don't come in." Alice panicked and something fell from her hand. I'm sorry. What's this?" As I picked it up, Alice turned pale. It was a pregnancy test. "What?" The positive line was clearly visible. What is this? What's going on?" I was at a loss for words, unable to believe what I was seeing. Alice stopped speaking and said nothing more. No matter how much I pressed or got angry afterward, Alice wouldn't tell me the truth. She only nodded to confirm that the pregnancy test was hers. Which means Alice is pregnant. I couldn't believe it. Alice had indeed started menstruating this year. But she's still an elementary school student, still a child. I've heard that some kids her age already have boyfriends, but Alice isn't like that. She wouldn't say who the father was. Could it have been? The thought terrified me. What kind of person would do such a thing to a child? I tried everything to get her to talk, but it was no use. Eventually, Alice started crying. At that point, there wasn't much I could do. I went back to finishing up the dinner I had abandoned and took care of Mike when he came home. Dinner was unusually quiet for the three of us. Alice ate little and quickly retreated to her room, saying, "I'm going to bed." "Wait, Alice. We're not done talking yet." Calling her to stay was useless. No response. Eventually, Mike, sensing something was off, asked, "What's going on? Both of you were so quiet during dinner. Did you guys have a fight?" At Mike's words, I let out a deep sigh. Actually, after some thought, I decided to consult Mike. This was too big an issue to handle alone. Mike was shocked upon hearing it. "No way! Are you kidding? Could it be a mistake?" But I saw it with my own eyes. And Alice herself said, "This is mine." As I said this, Mike grimaced and exclaimed, "But Alice is still in elementary school. Who could she possibly?" I mentioned what had occurred to me. Come to think of it, there was a message recently about a weirdo hanging around near the school. They said to be careful. I don't want to think it, but maybe. It's possible. She might have been approached by a weirdo on her way home. Mike nodded. That makes sense. Maybe that's why she can't talk about it. But if she really is pregnant, it's serious. We have to take her to an OBGYN. Yeah. And I'll try talking to Alice too. Depending on how things go, we might need to go to the police. Hearing police made me feel dizzy. This was turning into a nightmare. But we had to catch the culprit soon. I couldn't forgive someone who would do such a thing to a grade schooler. We had to act fast. Luckily, tomorrow is Saturday, everyone is off. We decided to persuade Alice to go to the hospital or police. With our resolve set, we were ready. The next morning, after breakfast, as we were about to talk to Alice, my smartphone rang. Hello? Yes, what? It was my boss. Apparently, there was a problem, and he asked if I could come to work. The workplace consists of the president and his wife, one full-time boss, and 2 of us part-timers, 5 in total. Normally, part-timers don't work on weekends, but they were short-staffed and asked if I could come in for a few hours. But I hesitated, but since they said it would be done by noon, I reluctantly agreed. I explained the situation to Mike and told him I had to go to work. Mike understood and said, "Don't worry, I'll talk to Alice while you're gone." I was anxious. The job was to correct an ordering mistake and was supposed to be finished by noon, but it ended up taking until 3 p.m. I wondered if Mike and Alice were waiting impatiently. Rushing home, I called out, "I'm home," but no one replied. Feeling uneasy, I went into the living room. And then I saw a shocking scene. Alice and Mike were lying face down. "Alice! Mike! What happened?" I rushed over, but neither was breathing. Nearby, there was a rope and a paper that looked like a suicide note. The note read, "I'm sorry. I was the one who assaulted Alice. I don't expect to be forgiven. I'm taking responsibility and leaving this world with Alice." I was stunned by what I saw. What on earth does that mean? Mike was the one who got Alice pregnant. On top of that, killing. With trembling fingers, I operated my smartphone to call an ambulance and the police. Indeed, both were deceased. I could barely stand, overwhelmed by what had happened. This is a nightmare. It didn't feel like reality. Despite my confusion, the police coldly proceeded with their protocol. A crime scene investigation was promptly conducted, and then I was taken to the police station for questioning. There, I had to speak of unspeakable things. That Alice was not my biological daughter, that she was pregnant, and that we were about to go to the hospital and police right before this happened. Being detained for a long time and speaking continuously, I was indeed exhausted. I was mentally shocked, and my head felt foggy. It was then. The middle-aged detective facing me looked at me with sympathetic eyes. "Your husband must have been quite panicked. If you went to the police, they would perform tests, and his relations with your daughter would be revealed." Angered by his words, I retorted, "My husband is not that kind of person. This is some mistake." I don't want to say this, but such incidents are surprisingly common. She wasn't your biological child, right? It's conceivable he adopted her with that in mind from the start. I was appalled by the detective's insinuations. "That's terrible. How can you say such a thing? Both my husband and I have always cared for Alice deeply. It's unthinkable we would have such reprehensible motives." As I said this, the detective's expression grew even more pitiful. "Well, I understand you want to believe that. But men often have a side they don't show their wives." Mike was not that kind of man. I was about to say so and opened my mouth. But, exhausted and angered to my limit, I couldn't speak anymore. It seemed from the note that they had concluded it was a suicide pact. That was impossible. No matter how much I insisted, the police wouldn't listen. Thus, no further investigation was conducted. Eventually, Alice and Mike's funeral was held. Even as I went through the motions, I couldn't believe it. I kept thinking this had to be a dream. My mind was constantly foggy, as if shrouded in haze, but with my parents' help, we somehow managed to get through the funeral. Alice's school friends, especially Nicole and Daniel who were close to her, attended. Mike's friends and colleagues were there too. Everyone was struck by grief, but given the nature of their deaths, it's undeniable they were treated like touchy subjects. Despite not wanting to hear it, I caught whispers from the mourners. "That person, it seems he could only love small children. And to think he did that with an unrelated child. What a terrible incident." I wanted to scream out, "No, that's wrong. Why did it come to this? Mike would never do such a thing." Something was definitely off. But there was nothing I could do. Lately, I've been unable to sleep or eat. I've become significantly emaciated. I had lived an ordinary life up until now. Why did this happen? I lacked the energy to do anything as time simply passed. Then, one day, the doorbell rang, and I opened the door. It was Nicole and her mother, Samantha. It was the first time I'd seen Nicole since the funeral. Her face was even more tear-streaked than before. Thank you for coming, Nicole." I forced a smile on my tired face and led them in front of the portrait. Nicole started talking to Alice's portrait, crying, "Alice, I wanted to hang out with you more. To play games and study together. Alice, I miss you." Hearing the child's pure voice, I felt tears welling up in my eyes too. But then, something changed. Nicole began to sob more violently. I'm sorry. It's my fault." "What do you mean?" "It's your fault, Nicole?" Silent Nicole was replaced by Samantha, who began to speak. "Actually, there's something Nicole told me." And then, she revealed a shocking truth. "So, that's what happened. Thank you for telling me, Nicole." After hearing the story, I was stunned. "This fact should be reported to the police," Samantha said decisively. But I just looked down. "But, it seems they've already concluded it was a suicide pact." Then Samantha said something surprising. I have a relative in the police force. I'll tell my relative about this and ask if they can somehow get a reinvestigation started. Please do. It's just too sad for Alice and her dad if the truth goes untold. Nicole pleaded with tears in her eyes. Their words moved my weakened heart just a little. All right. I wanted to uncover what really happened to Alice and Mike. Since Nicole and her family were willing to help, I resolved to do everything within my power. A few days later, I went to the police station to talk about the facts conveyed by Nicole and her family. I briefly explained the situation to the middle-aged detective who had spoken with me before. So, I don't think it was a suicide. Please reinvestigate. However, the detective frowned. It's difficult to proceed on that. The case was closed based on the suicide note. To the detective who looked like he found this all a bother, I made my plea. Please, can you do something about this? I kept asking, but the detective's response didn't change. Moreover, he started saying things like, "We have various other cases and are very busy." It seemed there was no helping it. I mentioned the name of a police contact that Samantha had told me about. If you could just talk to this person. And the detective's face went pale. Excuse me for a moment. Saying this, he left the seat, and after a while, he came back with someone who looked like his boss. Suddenly, his tone became polite, and he said, "We will reinvestigate." This surprised me. The relative of Samantha's in the police force must be quite influential. Whatever it is, I'm grateful. Anyway, it was a relief. After that, things started to move significantly. Later, 2 police officers came to my house. They seemed different from before. They had an apologetic attitude. Once I led them to the living room, they suddenly apologized. "We are sorry. We had been investigating this as a possible case of suicide pact, but that wasn't it." "Just as I thought," I murmured. One of the officers, with a grave face, informed me. The 2 were actually killed by a third party. The police, upon reinvestigating, looked into everything. They took fingerprints from the house again, reviewed items left behind and security camera footage, and conducted more interviews in the area. As a result, they found footage from a security camera near our home that showed the true culprit's car. It was Amanda and Brian, the parents of Daniel, a friend of his. They were the ones who had killed Alice and Mike. Actually, Daniel was the one who had gotten Alice pregnant. That day, I heard a confession from Nicole. According to her, the whole thing started a few months back. Daniel, curious and knowledgeable, seemed to have been awakened to sexual matters by adult movies and comics one day. Out of mere curiosity, he suggested to Nicole, "Let's play an adult game." Nicole, lacking knowledge, didn't quite understand what that entailed. But, she felt something ominous about it instinctively. Because of this, Nicole refused. She felt uncomfortable spreading such stories and kept it to herself. Since then, Daniel stopped trying to convince Nicole. And next, he pressured Alice. According to Nicole, Alice didn't seem to know much about sex either. From what I could see, Alice was pure and didn't seem interested in such things at all. "Alice is kind, so I think she couldn't refuse Daniel's request. She probably didn't understand what it would entail. I should have told her, if Daniel asks you, just say no, then none of this would have happened. It's my fault," Nicole said, crying. She regretted not having advised her, it seemed. As things were, the situation had taken the worst possible turn. 2 people had died. At the funeral, Nicole was shocked to learn that Mike, Alice's father, was under suspicion. She couldn't just let it be, and mustered the courage to confide in Samantha. And then, Samantha, having learned everything, brought Nicole to her house. Alice was impregnated by Daniel. It wasn't your husband, so there's no reason for you to be heartbroken. It may be hard to say this, but perhaps they were killed by the adults around Daniel to silence them. Samantha seemed hesitant to say it. But that terrifying speculation turned out to be true. Daniel's parents, Amanda and Brian, had made a plan. It all started when they learned of Alice's pregnancy. Alice, puzzled by the changes in her body, must have told Daniel about her condition. Naturally, Daniel would have told his parents, Amanda and Brian. Amanda and Brian panicked. Daniel's family was distinguished, with members holding high social status. A sexual scandal involving a child, who was still in elementary school, was unfathomable. So, they decided to kill Alice before the story became public. They probably had a story planned out about Alice being harassed by a pervert and dying as a result. Initially, they intended to lure only Alice somewhere. Presumably, Alice, having been called out for some reason, was planning to go alone. That was supposed to happen on a Saturday morning, after I had gone to work. However, Mike, having learned of it, must have confronted Alice. At that moment, Alice told Mike the truth. Then the two of them went to Daniel's home together. But this was an unexpected turn of events for Amanda and Brian. It seems they had told her to come without letting her parents know, and Mike's presence threw off their plans. In a panic, Amanda and Brian changed their plan. They decided to kill both Alice and Mike, making it look like a suicide pact. When the incident was over, they carried the body to my living room and left the rope and suicide note next to Alice and Mike. The story is that Mike had been looking at Alice in a sexual way and got her pregnant, so he had no choice but to kill her. The suicide note was forged using a computer to avoid detection through handwriting analysis. And, to be thorough, both wore gloves to ensure no fingerprints were left in the house. Their plan was a complete success. However, it made me wonder why the police investigation was so sloppy, but there was a reason for that too. It was due to the unique customs of this area. In a region inhabited by many wealthy individuals and business owners, the police tended to be on their side. It was mutually beneficial for various conveniences. Thus, as someone who was neither wealthy nor a business owner, a so-called outsider, I was at a disadvantage from the start. For the police, investing time and effort into investigating outsiders had no return, naturally leading to a half-hearted investigation. Even when the circumstances strongly suggested murder by a third party, the police hastily concluded it was a suicide based on the note, without proper investigation. This case was on the verge of being buried in darkness. Then, an unexpected savior appeared. It was Nicole and her family. The relative of Samantha who worked in law enforcement was likely not just a regular officer. Probably someone with a considerable rank within the police force. Otherwise, a reinvestigation would have never been initiated. It later became clear that the middle-aged detective who had been in charge of my case was demoted. This, too, can be attributed to the influence of that high-ranking police official. Upon re-examination, Amanda and Brian's car was spotted on a neighbor's security camera. Of course, that alone was not enough evidence. But there was also testimony from neighbors who had seen a suspicious man and woman entering our house. Based on these, a search warrant for Amanda and Brian's home was issued. Whether they anticipated this outcome is unknown, but the Daniel family's home was meticulously cleaned. Not a single fingerprint was found, yet fortune was on our side. Fibers from the clothing Alice wore that day were discovered in Daniel's home. Footprints believed to be Mike's were also found near the entrance. With this evidence, Amanda and Brian were arrested. Initially, they tried to deny everything, But when faced with the evidence, they quickly confessed. To hide the shocking scandal that elementary school-aged Daniel had impregnated Alice, they admitted to killing Alice and Mike. With this, the suspicions against Mike were cleared. I felt a slight sense of relief. It was too cruel for Mike to be murdered and then accused of being a criminal. Subsequently, this case stirred up a huge public uproar, becoming a major news story. Television and magazines featured it as the darkness of a wealthy family, and it seems photos of the Daniel family were spreaded on social media. I say seems because I didn't actually see it myself. Friends and acquaintances told me about it, but I tried to avoid unreliable internet information. Because I now have to fight in the real world. That is, in court. As a family member, I decided to utilize the victim participation system and go to court. I just had to say something to them. I didn't want to spend my time sulking, but rather I wanted to fight back. When I took my seat in court, Amanda and Brian immediately caught my eye. Both were looking down, aged and worn. In that moment, they didn't look like the glittering wealthy at all. But more than that, I struggled to suppress the anger and sadness welling up inside me. To think Alice and Mike were killed just for these people's vanity. Unforgivable. Prompted by the judge, I gave my statement. Alice wasn't our biological child, but we raised her with love and care. Can you understand the grief of having her suddenly taken away for such an unreasonable reason? Moreover, you plotted to also kill my husband and have him treated as a criminal. For the sake of appearances, to hide your child's wrongdoing with such a trivial reason. I will never forgive you for taking the lives of two people for that. I wish for the maximum penalty. The courtroom fell silent as I shouted these words. Amanda and Brian were ashen-faced and shaking violently. Perhaps they had finally realized the enormity of the crime they had committed. But it was too late. No amount of regret could undo the taking of lives. If possible, I wish they could give back the 2 lives they took. If not, I believe they should atone with their own lives. Then the verdict was delivered. As requested, the ultimate penalty was imposed on the 2 of them. To be honest, I felt relieved, at least for the moment. The date of execution is unknown. Amanda and Brian will spend their days in fear until that day comes. Alice and Mike will not return, but I wish they could somehow understand the fear they experienced. The 2 of them were pitiful, having been killed for such a trivial reason as societal appearance. And there's another person involved in this case. Daniel. Though he was not directly involved in the event that took the lives of Alice and Mike, it is a fact that he impregnated Alice. Daniel has confessed, and there are testimonies from his parents. But Daniel is a minor, still in elementary school. As a result, a notification was sent to Child Welfare Services, and he was placed in a care facility. He is now facing the crime he committed, crying and filled with regret. He's still a child, but he gave in to desire and curiosity, hurting Alice. I hope he never forgets that. And I hope he truly repents. Later, I reported the outcome of the trial to Alice and Mike at their graves. Mike, your name has been cleared. Alice, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. But they received the ultimate penalty. It doesn't mean you can come back, but I've avenged you. So please, rest in peace. As I said this, the flowers I had placed earlier swayed slightly. It might have been the wind, but it felt as if they were responding, and tears welled up in my eyes. Then, 10 years passed. I now live far away from that land, in a city. Part of the reason is that being in a place filled with memories of Alice and Mike was painful, but more than that, I grew to despise living in a land populated by the wealthy. People who chase after appearances and privileges. That was, after all, what led to Alice and Mike being killed. I found it all so meaningless and saw no need to stay in such a negative place. Since then, while working, I've been active through a victims' rights group, organizing lectures, suggesting places for victims to talk. The activities are varied. Nicole has been helping me. Nicole has become a college student, studying psychology. Moving to the city for university just as I did, she started to help with our activities. Nicole felt guilty for not being able to warn him, tormented by a sense of guilt. But the fault lies entirely with Daniel's family, not Nicole. You don't have to worry. I've told her many times. And over time, she has begun to move forward, now able to show a bright smile again. Recently, the presence of our victims' rights group has gradually become known, leading to more lectures, magazine, and TV opportunities. Though we've become quite busy, I've never forgotten about Alice and Mike for a moment. I've often thought about what it would be like if they were still alive. But each time, I devote myself to our cause, to support the existence of many victims' families, to be of some help to them. That, I believe, is the best way to honor their memory. As one left behind, I am determined to fulfill this mission. No matter how tough things get, I plan to keep moving forward, believing that Alice and Mike are watching over us from heaven.